It's the Lament Configuration horror podcast. My name's Greg Knox, and I'm joined by someone who looks like Paris Hilton, but is less likely to appear in amateur porn. It's our resident body count girl, Rhea Fend.
Thanks, Greg. Always a wonderful introduction, as always. I am back for another episode because, well, those bodies will not count themselves, will they?
No, we are needed very much to do that job. Otherwise, we'd have to outsource it to India, I guess, or whatever. I don't know. Wherever they outsource things to, I don't know. Yeah. I don't want you people to think I'm not PC, everybody. There are other countries you can outsource work to. It's just in my company, they outsource work to India because it's cheaper. So,
same.
Yeah.
Oh, it's all getting outsourced.
It's all getting outsourced, exactly. And moving away from that sort of slightly un-PC note that I've decided to start the show on because I'm in a bit of a funny mood, everybody. What we're going to talk about today, it's the second of our shows on Italian horror films. So on the last show, we discussed Italian slasherific kind of films. But on the show today, we're doing Italian supernatural films. Ooh, super spooky. So expect sort of discussions that are of a, well, just, listen to the show as it's been so far. It started off great. Already on a very offensive nature.
Yeah, so just while we're on that subject, you can expect spoilers, explicit language, and other things that we discuss of an adult nature that might possibly offend you. Don't say you haven't been warned, basically.
No, I mean, fuck, I say, you've been listening to the show. If you've not switched off already, then, well, I mean, if you've been listening to all our shows, you know what to expect by now, surely. We are the most irreverent horror show probably on the whole internet, I would say. We just don't care, so we'll just talk about pretty much anything.
What we care about is horror, so welcome to the Lament Configuration podcast.
On a more serious note, I want to start with our first film for the show today, which is by Dario Argento. It's his second film on the Video Nasties list, and this is Inferno, which is slightly different from the other film that we discussed. So on a couple of shows ago, we discussed Tenebrae, which is a giallo. Now, this was Dario Argento's follow-up to Suspiria. So quick history lesson about Dario Argento. So he made 3 giallo films. He tried to make a film that was very different from giallo because he got bored, made fuck all money, so he had to go back and make another giallo, which was Deep Red, which is very, very successful. He then made Suspiria, which is his most well-known film, and this is the follow-up to that film. And all I will say about it is that it makes absolutely fuck all sense. So if you like Suspiria, this is going to be very, very similar to that. In fact, it's probably a film that makes less sense even than Suspiria.
Very true, and it's similarly styled and lit in that beautiful red and blue as we have known throughout other giallo films. You've got the classic leather gloves and the knife blade, and you've got your typical murderer going around sort of a haunted house-esque type building. But I'll give you the synopsis for this one particular one, which is incredibly similar to Suspiria, but slightly less easy to follow, let's say. So it's a 1980 film. I think all 3 of these films that we're going to discuss today are actually, the same year, 1980. And the synopsis is, an American college student in Rome and his sister who lives in New York investigate a series of killings in both locations where their resident addresses are the domain of 2 covens of witches.
So what I would say about this film, as I said, literally just now, is that really, if you're approaching this film wanting it to make sense, wanting it to be logical, you are basically kidding yourself. This film, as I said, it makes absolute fuck all sense. Suspiria, although it's very dreamlike and it's very, very illogical in a lot of ways, it had a plot at the centre of it, which was about Susie Bannion in the ballet school and basically her sort of discovering what's going on at this ballet school with the Coven of Witches. This film is very, very different. To me, this film is like a loose collection of scenes tied together with a very, very kind of slim plot.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, they've got this book from an antique shop, which is like a rare book called The Three Mothers, which the plot revolves around. They've got the antique shop, which is Kazanian Antiques, I think that's how you pronounce it. Then it's kind of loosely connected with some keys that they're looking for, which you get clues of in this book, The Three Mothers, which is apparently known in both these locations. And essentially it does feel like a haunted house film, really. Most of the film is spent walking around this rather impressive mansion-type house in different locations that feel really similar. Plus, you've got a similar setup as Suspiria, because instead of the ballet school, you've got a music school.
Yeah, sort of. The music school elements are very, very muted in comparison to Suspiria. So there is one very key scene that happens about 20 minutes into the film that takes place at this music school, where this very beautiful, striking woman appears stroking a cat during the middle of a lecture, and then she disappears and no one can really see her, which is when I say this film is very dreamlike. So It has the feeling of a dream. So obviously the main criticism that people throw at the film is, well, it doesn't make any sense. But if you're going to make a film like this, it doesn't have to make sense.
Yeah, because it is really dreamlike. The use of the cats in the film is very creepy. It's quite well done. Maybe a little over the top in places, but like you say, it is dreamlike.
I think I know which scene you're talking about.
There's one scene in particular that I really love.
Yeah, that's a very interesting scene. When we go on to talk about the deaths, I think we'll go into that one in a bit more detail because it's quite amusing.
Yeah, I imagine as watching this film as a cat dad yourself, you were probably just wincing.
Yeah, there are things as the owner of a cat that I'm very used to seeing. For example, a cat eating a mouse. That's something, if you own cats, you'll have seen at least once, either a mouse or a bird or a frog or something like that. So it didn't really shock me.
Yep, okay. Well, yeah, you are used to cats. I am not, but I think it's used quite well in this film, so we will get into that later. Something else to discuss here, and I'm just trying to contrast this with Suspiria, and I can't quite remember. Does Argento quite like his films to be a wet t-shirt competition? Because it does seem to be in this film.
Well, Argento does like water. Water is something that is prevalent in a lot of his films, particularly in the 70s and the 80s. So, yes, in this film in particular, it rains quite a lot. There is a very key scene right at the start of the film where there is a huge body of water. There's a scene that takes place in a river, I think. It's supposed to be a river or a pond or something. So, yeah, Argento does love water. Argento, is weird that you bring that up, because Argento is probably, along with maybe Mario Bava, I would say the least sleazy of the Italian directors of this period.
Well, I think he did ban bras from the set of this film because there aren't any. And like the first scene that you see that in is where she goes to get the keys from the basement, and she essentially goes into what looks like a small puddle, but it ends up being an entire room underneath, which is quite amazing actually. It's the sets are amazing in this film. Really loved watching those. And it's really well shot. Even, the underwater aspects of it are very well shot.
Oh yeah, it's incredibly well shot. So it's actually probably one of my favourite scenes in the whole film. It's, literally it's in the first sort of 15 minutes of the film is this shot of this character, who's Rose, who is played, interestingly, by Irene Miracle, who was in the Night Train murders. She was one of the girls that gets killed in that film. What happens is that she goes looking for this key. She drops her keys in, what you think is like going to be just a puddle, and it turns out to be this whole, I don't know, many, many feet deep underwater kind of, I don't know what it's
like
supposed to be.
Another room, isn't it? It's like another room. There's like chandeliers down there, and you can see a carpet and some furniture. It's quite amazing.
Yeah, and God knows why it's there. That doesn't really matter, as I said. But what happens is she manages to swim down there to try and get this key. Turns out that there's some kind of dead body down there that maybe tries to attack her. It just reminded me of the scene in Jaws, where he's underwater and he's snorkeling and the dead body appears in the boat.
Yeah, it reminded me of that as well, and it is quite startling. And even though it is obvious that it's a practical effect and it's just a prosthetic, a fake dead body, it does look quite effective actually. It's like a body with a skinless face with some skeleton showing through, and it is quite startling when she sees it.
Yeah, now interestingly, this scene that we're talking about was very, very heavily sort of second unit directed, I should say, by Mario Bava, the great Italian director. We already discussed one of his films on a previous show, Bay of Blood. And he was sort of a very inspirational figure for Argento. So Bava, what he did, he used to be a cinematographer, like we said previously, and what
Mm-hmm.
he was really good at is he was good at making these shots that seemed unbelievable and made them look much better, but actually didn't have a lot of, there wasn't really as much going on as it appeared, so he kind of made the most use of what he had available to him to create these shots, which looked absolutely amazing and impressive and looked like they
Yeah.
cost thousands, but probably cost like hundreds.
Yeah, that's great. It's really awesome.
And what I like about it as well is the sound design, because what they've done is when she's underwater, the sound on the Foley, I guess, whatever they're using, it sounds like how water sounds when it goes in your ears when you're underwater.
Yeah, I loved that as well. And I really felt like as she went deeper to get these keys, it was so tense because she had to hold her breath for longer. You were almost watching it holding your breath yourself. And then when she had to come back up, I had a feeling she wouldn't be able to find the hole quite as easily because it's quite a small hole. And then she really panics when she's trying to get out because she's been holding her breath for quite a long time. And because you've got this like underwater sound going on and she's panicking, it does make you feel really closed in and worried that she's not going to make it out. And it's such a fantastic scene. It's really tense.
Yeah, and as you said, like the production design generally in the whole film is absolutely incredible. I mean, it's very similar to Suspiria in the lighting as well. So you've got the very, very bright red in the lighting, very, very bright red walls. You've got bright blue lighting, you've got bright green lighting and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very similar in that regard. I think the interior of the building is supposed to be similar to the building in Suspiria because I think the idea is that the buildings were designed by the same person.
Yeah, I really loved the old library. I thought that was absolutely stunning. It was amazing. And also, I really loved the scenes where you could see the front of the antique shop and you could see them talking inside. You could see the silhouettes. And it was really old fashioned, like, say, like that 1940s kind of noir style, but with this injection of colour. So, not a lot really to see aside from just the silhouettes, and you can hear them talking. And just the shop front through the window, which I just thought was beautifully set up.
Yeah, so Argento uses a lot of the same behind the scenes people as he has done in previous films. So the production designer and special effects artists are the same that he used on films like Deep Red and Suspiria, Tenebrae, Opera. So he's got his regular collaborators together, and yeah, you can tell because, as I said, like it looks absolutely amazing. I mean, you can't deny, even if you don't like the film itself, it looks incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't particularly engaged with this film or the plot. I much preferred Suspiria, but visually it does keep me engaged and it is unique. He's definitely got his own signature style, and with the crew that he uses, they have gone their own way with it. It's very distinctive looking.
Yes. Now, it's interesting you bring up the scene with the library because I would say that whole section there is probably my favourite in the whole film. Now, I like the scene with underwater and stuff like that. That's amazing. But there's something about the scene where you've got a character called Sarah who's in this library after closing time and she sneaks downstairs and you're in this room where you've got burning pots everywhere.
Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah, it just, the way that looks to me with the fire and the burning pots and just the overall decor in the room itself and the way it's lit, the way it's framed, to me that's just, unbelievable.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I mean, the actual library itself upstairs, I did love. Anyone who hasn't seen this film, if you're familiar with Ghostbusters, you'll know what a huge gothic library looks like. And this is by no means different. I mean, because it is in New York as well. They were obviously quite similar back then in the 80s, I think.
Yeah, you'll be surprised at the number of Italian films from this period that are set in New York, as we will discuss coming up. So yeah, I agree. So the plot itself, as you said, you've got scenes that are supposed to take place in New York, and then you've got scenes that are supposed to take place in Rome. And there's this weird kind of they'll be in Rome in 1 minute, and then the next minute they'll suddenly be in New York, and yeah, it feels very weird.
Well, when in Rome.
Indeed. Jesus Christ. What did you think of the music in the film? Because the music is a bit of a sticking point for some people, because it's not done by Goblin, it's done by Keith Emerson of Emerson, Lake and Palmer.
Well, I liked it. I've noted down here that when Sarah is going through the rainstorm and she's returning the letter, so she gets in the taxi, there's some really cool music on then. The dub is not that over the top, and the music, I don't know if I've noted down that I thought it was like especially amazing, but it's pretty cool. I liked it.
Yeah, I would say that my favourite part of the whole score is sort of the key song, which happens sort of over the end credits, because that's probably one of my favourite songs used in all of Argento's films, I would say.
Yeah, I did actually note that down. The music at the end is great. It's really awesome.
It's very bombastic.
I agree.
Yeah, I'm quite curious why Goblin didn't do this film, actually, because it's quite weird, because they did, obviously, Deep Red, they did Suspiria, and then they did Tenebrae, like we discussed previously, so I'm not sure why they didn't do this one.
Yeah, I thought that as well. I mean, maybe there's a chance that they were actually just busy at that point and couldn't do it, because it seems weird that he wouldn't use them.
Yeah, it's most bizarre. What was your favourite death in the whole film?
Okay, so let's see. I did actually count 9 deaths in this film. And, favourite death, let's see.
Well, shall I give you mine?
Yeah, you go first.
Yes, so my favourite death in the whole film would be the death of Sarah by the windows sort of jamming down on her neck over and over and over again. So it's very, very weird. It feels very odd. I mean, the whole film feels very odd and dreamlike anyway, but this death in particular, because how it's set up is she's wandering around this house. It's very dark, apart from the red lighting used sort of very, very randomly. And then she gets grabbed by these two kind of very, very old-looking hands and holds her in place. She gets impaled on these nails in the windowsill. And then the hand sort of grabs the window and sort of jams it down on her neck, but not all the way. It kind of it feels like it stops right at her neck, and then it does it again and again. And
yeah, that's so weird. It's like a guillotine, isn't it?
Yeah, and it kind of felt like a death that takes place right at the start of Suspiria, where you've got something very, very similar that happens, where you've got someone's sort of head being pulled through a window. I think Argento must like that, because it happens in quite a few of his films. But yeah, it just something about it just feels very odd as well. Feels very eerie. I wouldn't say the film is scary as such, but it does have this very, very uncomfortable feel to it. Maybe because it's so dreamlike. Maybe because of the way it's done with the music as well. Stuff like that.
Yeah, that death is really cool. It definitely made me wince, and it's quite detailed as well with the way that you see the nails. Probably my favourite death is Mr. Kazanian, who gets eaten by rats with red eyes, and then his neck gets cut with a knife by a guy from a catering van selling hot dogs and burgers.
Yeah.
That's right after he tries to take a bag of screaming and screeching cats and drown them in a lake whilst he's on crutches.
Yeah.
But there's also another one where like one of the like witches, that kind of the nurse or the sister from the big sort of mansion house, she drops a candle, she sets the curtain on fire, she tries to put it out, and then she falls out of the window wrapped up in the curtain and she burns to death. That's quite epic. I think like the stunt work on that would have been very cool to witness.
Yeah, that one is quite... Yeah, I don't know how to feel about that one, because in a way it's kind of her own fault that she dies, because there's this curtain that's on fire and then she pulls it down on top of herself while it's burning. So it's like, you could have not done that and you'd probably still be alive.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's supposed to give you like the satisfaction that because she's not a good person. So you're supposed to feel quite satisfied that she's kind of killed herself and, she's finished herself off, which is getting her just desserts.
Yeah, I mean, the death of Kazanian is pretty, again, very uncomfortable. I think because it goes on for quite a long time. I think
Mm.
that's kind of how I felt about it because, for those people who haven't seen the film, so he's on crutches and yeah, he's got this bag of cats because his shop is infested with cats. And so he's got them in a bag and he tries to dump them in a river and he goes in the river on his crutches, which is like,
Yeah.
why have you done that? Doesn't really make sense. And then, yeah, he falls over face first in the river and then all these hundreds upon hundreds of rats appear and start eating him.
And they've got red, flashing eyes. It's hilarious. So funny.
They're like super evil rats.
Yeah. And he's like, oh, they're eating me alive.
Yeah, well, and also it takes place during an eclipse as well. I don't know if that means anything. I know earlier in the film they did mention, oh, there's going to be an eclipse tonight. Ooh, very, very scary. And then, yeah, that happens. So I don't know if the eclipse is kind of meant to indicate that it's this very, I don't know, like it makes everyone go crazy, I suppose.
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of references to the moon which don't make a lot of sense, but just kind of adds to the atmosphere, I guess. And he's like saying, oh God, my crutch. She's really funny.
Yeah, I mean, because it's an Italian film, you do kind of have to accept that the dubbing is not going to be that great.
Yeah, it's always like that, isn't it? And you've got the effects are a little bit ropey, but they're quite charming and old school in a very 80s way. So the rats do look quite fake at times, but it has got that charm, that kind of old school horror charm that we do like, so it's okay.
Yeah, and the scene with the cats that you referred to, that's Daria Nicolodi, so she doesn't have a very big role in this film either. She's only in the film for about 10 minutes, and then, yeah, she gets dispatched by lots of cats attacking her at once.
Yeah, and then she gets stabbed as well, doesn't she?
She does indeed, yes. Although it's quite weird how it's done in that there's lots of close-ups. I think that's Argento's thing. Like Umberto Lenzi and Jess Franco, for example, they'll use lots of zooms in their films, whereas with Argento he uses lots of close-ups. Normally it's of inanimate objects, so he's a very good visual storyteller in his films. But yeah, in this case you'll have shots of cats' mouths eating. There's one scene where someone cuts these very, very, very nice cut of meat, I have to say, and then feeds it to its cat. It's very, very sort of spoiled cat being given like this very, very nice cuts of meat. And yeah, sort of you've got the cat eating the mouse that I referred to earlier, and then you've got, yeah, like these cats scratching and biting Daria Nicolodi.
Yeah, and I think the close-ups also mask the fact that the cats probably aren't as menacing as they sound, and then they've got the Foley over the top, which does make it sound a lot more menacing. So it's like clever cropping to imply that it's a lot more vicious than you actually see in real life, which, is, it looks great as well, but it's a very clever way to sort of portray it.
Now, the acting in the film is, I mean, it's okay. It's not horrible. But what did you think of the lead actor? Because it's quite interesting. I don't know about you, but I preferred the first half of the film to the second half. The first half, there isn't really that much dialogue. There's barely any dialogue at all, really. It's more, like I said, it's a very visual film. So it's one set piece and then another set piece and another set piece. And then when the character of Mark is introduced properly, I don't know if it's because the actor didn't really know what was going on, or he thought, what's my motivation? What's actually going on here? But he kind of felt a little bit flat for a lot of the film.
Yeah, I agree. I preferred the first half and thought that it did pull you in a bit more, and then the second half did feel a little bit flat, like he wasn't as involved as he should have been. You kind of forgot who he was at that point. It felt like there was quite a lot of distance between the first part and the second part. It wasn't properly connected.
Yeah, because I would say that this film overall is very underrated in terms of Argento's films up to opera, I would say, because unfortunately it comes after his best and most well-known film, and it's very similar. In fact, it's part of this what is called the Three Mothers trilogy, which Suspiria was not intended to be the first part of a trilogy, but because it did so well, I think they kind of expanded on the mythology that it introduced, and that's why there's all this talk of the Three Mothers and things like that.
Yeah, it breaks it down into the three different types, which is obviously the titles of the other films. And the key song that we were talking about does actually have the word Suspiria repeatedly in it, which is pretty cool, but also kind of weird because this isn't the film Suspiria. For me, it was a little too similar. Like, I feel like they should have gone more different, but I did appreciate it's a very beautiful film and liked watching it from that point of view. But yeah, a little ridiculous in places and needed to make more sense.
Yeah, so it is about like a huge evil building with lots of red interior. It looks very, very similar. I think it's shot very, very similarly as well. So yeah, I can see why there's all these huge comparisons to Suspiria. I mean, it's kind of almost inevitable, but I think it's very, very unfair because I would say the first half of this film, I was really, really engaged. Like, I didn't notice the time going at all. Now, admit that's probably because I like the film and I've seen it before, but when you're watching a film and you're bored and you just want the film to get the fuck on with it, you know, you are obviously going to look at the clock a lot more, whereas I didn't really do that just because even though, yeah, you've no clue what's going on half the time or why, you're just entranced by what you're looking at.
Yeah, I agree. It did feel a little slower in the second half, and I was really engaged in the first half, so it's not just you.
Yeah, and the last thing I think I'll probably say on this one is it's quite interesting comparing a film like this, which is a supernatural horror film from Italy, compared to other supernatural horror films that I've seen sort of around this period. So if you take Bava's supernatural horror films like Black Sunday or Kill Baby Kill or the segments of Black Sabbath, for example, they are supernatural films that take place in the past. And Roger Corman did this as well with films like Mask of the Red Death, Pit of the Pendulum, other films like that were based on the Edgar Allan Poe stories and stuff like that. So when you set films in the past, I don't know if the idea is because they're already set in the past, they won't date. But it's quite weird that Argento, what he does is he has all these supernatural films, but they're set in the present day. So they kind of feel very different to a lot of those films. And I think in a way that kind of works better, in my opinion.
Yeah, it definitely works for him, but I don't think everybody's able to do it as well. So yeah, I agree. He almost has this kind of timeless look to it though, like it is kind of very old-fashioned looking itself with the, you know, quite traditional haunted house look, like I said. Almost like 40s or 30s influenced. And almost like a little bit sort of Hammer horror influence. So I think that's why it doesn't seem like it's aged too much, and it does seem to live on very well.
Yeah, and I would say anyone who's seen this film before who likes this film, there's a more modern horror film that I've actually talked about on a different show, which is called The Strange Colour of Your Body's Tears, which is by the Belgian directors of Bruno Forzani and Helena Catet. And I would say that a lot of this film is actually present in the way that that film is very heavily stylized. In fact, the plot is kind of similar because it's set in a building and you've got all these pipes that kind of connect all the rooms together and people can listen to other rooms and things like that. And even the use of close-ups and the editing techniques used in that film are very similar to this film. So yeah, if you like Inferno, like I do, I heavily recommend Strange Colour of Your Body's Tears as well.
I still need to see that, actually. It's one of the ones on my list to watch.
It's a very, very long list, I'm sure, these days.
Yeah, it's always gathering more. Research, Greg, research.
Yes. So overall, I really, really like this film. Of all the video nasties we've watched, I would say this is probably one of my favourites. I say I love the look, love the style, I love the music. I love just the feel of it. It's this real dreamlike feel. You don't really get films like this anymore, where they just don't really make any sense, but you're just overwhelmed by the visuals. It's just, yeah, it's so good. So, so good. But is it a video nasty? That's the key question.
I'm going to say no.
Yeah, I totally agree. Again, I mean, I can kind of see why, if you're offended by a cat eating a mouse, why you might put it on the video nasties list, but that's something that happens in the wild a lot. Well, not even in the wild, in people's houses. If you have a mouse problem and you buy a cat, cats, they tend to like eating animals, be it mice or birds or other random creatures, shall we say. So it's not really something that person would find shocking. It's not something I would think would deprave someone, let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's Mother Nature and natural course of things. I enjoyed learning about Jello films. Not as big a fan as you are, but definitely appreciate it historically within horror and love the visual effects. So I did like this film, but not as high up on my list as you, I think.
Cool, that's very, very interesting that you say that, because we are coming sort of quite close to the end of our video nasty discussions. So, it's about near that time where we kind of discuss kind of like, well, what's your favourite and what's your least favourite and things of that nature, but I won't spoil too much for now, but yes, just, keep your eyes peeled. Let's just put it that way. So that's Inferno, made by one of the best directors, I think, in the history of horror, made by certainly one of the best directors in the history of Italian horror cinema. Now, Argento, he is quite famous in other ways because he had a lot of directors that were proteges of his. So Mario Bava's son, Lamberto Bava, is quite a well-known example of that, as is Michele Soavi, as is the director of the next film we're going to talk about, which is Luigi Cozzi. Which, now the interesting thing about Cozzi is he actually, I don't know if he owns it or he runs it or if he just manages it, because Argento, I imagine, is very busy, but he actually is, if you go to Dario Argento's museum and shop in Rome, you will meet Luigi Cozzi.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yes, because he runs it for Argento. So if you're a big fan of Argento, like I am, I've actually never been to Italy before. I would love to go to it to visit his museum, where you see all these bits and pieces for all his films and buy a bunch of merchandise of his. Anyway, Cozzi is a director, obviously, in his own right. You'll be surprised to learn he has actually directed a giallo, quite a good giallo actually, which is called The Killer Must Kill Again. Which I actually quite recommend. It's a pretty good giallo. This film is Contamination, which also goes by the alternative title of Alien Contamination, Contamination Alien on Earth, and slightly more generic sort of title, Toxic Spawn, which makes it sound kind of like a Toxic Avenger style movie, I think, but it's not really what it's about. This one, when you read up about it, people say, well, this film just rips off Alien. I think there's a little bit more to it than that, but Ria will let you know kind of what the actual synopsis of the film is.
Yeah, again, it's a 1980 film. The synopsis: a former astronaut helps a government agent and a police detective track down the source of some mysterious alien pod spores that are filled with lethal, flesh-dissolving acid. And he traces this to a South American coffee plantation controlled by alien pod clones. Now, I totally get the reference to Alien. It does feel a bit like an Alien ripoff, but I also compared this to possibly War of the Worlds. Also, if you've ever seen something like The Stuff and Street Trash, a bit like that, with the kind of coffee front on it. And also, oddly enough, maybe like Little Shop of Horrors with like Audrey 2, which you have to watch right to the end to get that reference. But yeah, it's an odd one. I have to say it felt incredibly long, but it's only an hour and 35 minutes. And it is a sci-fi horror. So I happen to think this was a little bit tedious. It's a little bit of an odd one. What did you think, Greg?
Yeah, so apart from the alien influences, shall we say, because in Italian horror cinema, what there is a tendency to do is whatever has come out in America, made lots of money, the Italians will decide back in those days, let's rip this off. Let's just take the same idea, do it for less money, and kind of just do it ourselves and claim it's like a sequel. So there probably was an alternative title for this film, which is like Alien 2. Wouldn't surprise me. So to me, yes, there are elements in this that are very similar to Alien. I thought, because I'd never seen the film before, I watched it for the show, and to me, I expected it to be set mostly in space. I don't know why. I think that's probably because one of Kotze's previous films that I haven't mentioned is a Star Wars ripoff starring a very young David Hasselhoff called Star Crash. So I think I expected it to be like that. That film is also notoriously bad, by the way, just to point it out.
With the Hoffmeister in it.
Young Hoff, yes, indeed. So yeah, I expected it to be more like that, but most of it, well, in fact, indeed all of it, bar a flashback, is sort of set on Earth. So I was like, okay, this is a bit different from what I was expecting. To me, it's a mix of Alien, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and I would also say a really kind of shit James Bond movie.
Yeah, I agree. And then the fact that this is all kind of in the jungle with the tribes for most part of it, which I have to say I did expect it to be set in space as well. So I was quite surprised that we were in the jungle for most of the film. It does kind of have that sort of cannibal holocaust sort of feel to that aspect of it, don't you think?
Yeah. So these random scenes that sort of take place in the jungle in South America that do kind of have a sort of cannibal holocaust feel, I think you're right. And also because you've got a scene set in New York. Now, have you seen Zombie Flesh Eaters yet?
No, I haven't, but I definitely need to see this film.
Well, we're going to watch it in a couple of shows' time because it was a video nasty, directed by Mr. Lucio Fulci, godfather of gore himself. And yet, the start of that film and the start of this film are very, very similar because you've got it's set in New York, as you will see by sort of lots of overhead shots of New York. So you've got Statue of Liberty, you've got the Twin Towers in there, sort of very, very typical. And Cannibal Ferox as well. Like, what is it about Italian films from this period that's like, shit, right, we've got to set in New York. We're going to have all these shots of New York so people know, yep, it's an American film. Look at it, we're in America.
Yeah, I know, crazy. And one other surprising aspect of this film is that the music is by Goblin in this film.
Yes, so very, very strange. The last film by Dario Argento, no Goblin score. This film, there is a Goblin score, believe it or not. So I wouldn't say it's one of Goblin's better scores, but you can definitely tell it's them. And I would say
for sure.
It's the second best thing that happens in the film itself. The best thing, of course, being the many, many, many stomach explosions that take place.
Oh yeah, so cool. And if you like films like I do, such as The Stuff or Street Trash, you'll understand what I mean. I quite like the fact that a consumer product then turns out to be something quite sinister. It's got this sort of satirical feel to it that, you know, big corporations might be plotting against us, or the government might be plotting against us, and they're doing it under the cover of this whole coffee plantation, which is quite cool.
Yeah, that's such a strange angle to do, because I thought, like, why is there so much coffee? Why are they making such a big thing about coffee? And then it's like, oh, it's because they're based in South America. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. But
Oh, I get it. Yeah, they call this coffee Universe, which is weird.
yeah, it's there's some very, very strange elements. So basically, when I went into this, I was expecting like a full-blown kind of, you know, sci-fi type film, and yeah, you get your eggs, which I think that's what they call them, but they at one point a character says, well, they're not actually eggs, they're actually sort of these sort of synthetic life forms, whatever they are. But then, yeah, just for the rest of the film, they just call them eggs, just to be a bit lazy, I guess. So you've got these eggs, which don't really look very threatening, because they're just eggs, they don't move, they just explode.
Yeah, well, the reference for the War of the Worlds is the fact that the eggs, they make this kind of really sad, mournful sound, but it does sound a bit like foghornish. And if you like War of the Worlds and you've seen the Tom Cruise version of the film, you'll remember that they have this kind of foghorn sound whenever the Martians are around. So I thought it was quite similar to that.
Yeah, I thought that kind of worked quite well, apart from in the one scene that everyone talks about. So you've got a character who's this sort of female lieutenant who the guys, because it's an Italian film in the 80s, obviously they're quite macho. They're talking about how this woman, you know, she's quite cold, you know, probably because she's in power. And at one point she decides to have a shower, as you do. A shower takes place, I think, in every Italian film at some point. So this evil guy Hamilton who is sort of our main villain in the film, he tries to bump off this woman by putting an egg in her bathroom. And the thing is, the egg doesn't move. It's just there making this noise for about 5 minutes, and this woman sort of tries to get out of the room. She sort of struggles to open the door, and she just completely fails, and she's really, really shit scared of this egg that's not doing anything. It's just sat there going,
Oh, even better. It's like she gives up. She doesn't even carry on trying to get out when she thinks that it's going to explode and then her insides are going to explode, which I don't think I would give up trying to get out if I'd thought that was going to happen. But then the evil guy, Hamilton, who's sat in the restaurant, telepathically knows that the egg didn't destroy her, and he feels it because he's so well connected with it. And I totally knew what was going to be at the end of this film, by the way, because if you watch the title credits, like the title sequence at the beginning, it actually credits somebody that created the monster at the end and names what the monster is, which is a Cyclops, and it ruins it. Like, why didn't they put that credit at the end instead of spoiling it? I was like, I know it's not that impressive, but I still didn't want it to be ruined within the first 2 minutes of the film.
No, I get what you mean, but at the same time, I think that's kind of what they did in those days. I think nowadays they would just call them creature effects or special makeup effects or something like that.
Yeah, just kind of pointed out exactly what the end monster would be, which kind of ruined it.
What did you think of the end monster, the Cyclops? Because I thought it actually looked quite cool. I thought for a practical effect, I thought it was pretty convincing, apart from, ironically enough, the eye. The eye kind of looked a bit shit, I'm not gonna lie.
The eye looked like a yellow flashing light bulb, like any random light bulb that you just screw into a fixture. So that was a bit shit, but the rest of it, like the skin and the way the guy got gobbled up at the end, like as though, you know, like when a snake eats someone and it kind of swallows them whole and like keeps eating it, just like opens its esophagus and just eats the whole thing. It was kind of like that, and it it was quite like effective, realistic looking practical effects, but the eye did ruin it, unfortunately.
Yeah, it kind of made it look a bit sort of, hokey, I would say. It was not like, I mean, and to me also, it sort of reminded me of the creature in Possession. I don't know about you, but it did remind me of that a little bit. But the creature in Possession, because it was done by Carlo Rambaldi, who's a fucking genius at these kind of things, it looked very, very convincing. Whereas this sort of did, but it had the one detail that made it look a bit cheap and cheesy.
Yeah, for me, it was a little too cheesy. I think the Possession beast was way, way more convincing and effective and like quite scary. Whereas this one, I quite liked it from like a sci-fi crappy point of view. But this Cyclops monster is a bit of a basic bitch compared to Possession beast. As well, I have got noted down here that the main Colonel woman, Colonel Stella Holmes, that she is a bit of a pompous bint as well. She's quite annoying throughout the whole film. Like, I get it that she's supposed to be like one of these 80s sort of power mad females, but yeah, she was a bit annoying.
Yeah, probably what didn't help is a lot of the, as you would expect from a film like this, very cheesy dialogue, of which there is quite a bit in this film, and such choice nuggets that I will present to you guys right now. At one point, a character says, talking about the eggs, "I don't believe these belong to our planet." And then she says, "You mean they come from outer space?" I'm like, right, okay. It's kind of self-evident.
Yeah, and it's really funny that they then talk about this expedition to Mars and how somebody didn't make it back, and it's like, oh, it's just so kind of cliche. And she like delivers a few kind of quips to the guys to kind of put them in their place, which is, again, is a little annoying because she's just a bit too over the top for my liking. But she says something at one point to Hubbard. It's quite obvious that you couldn't get it up even if you used a crane. It was quite funny. And then at one point, they keep calling her behind her back this broad, which is hilarious because that happens a lot in these 80s video nasties that we've been watching.
Yes.
And They say, like, 'cause she's quite moody and harsh and cold, and they can't sort of flirt with her. She won't allow it. So they just say, "Oh, is there something wrong with her? Or is she just married?" Because like she won't kind of succumb to their charms, which is really funny. And she's just quite a grumpy woman.
Yeah, how I miss the 80s.
Yeah, all that 80s hair and power dressing.
Yeah.
Big hair.
I kind of, as a bit of an aside, I do kind of wonder what feminists would think if they actually watch these films. It's quite lucky that a lot of these films are like really, really underground, and your common man on the street ain't going to be aware of films like this. They're not going to be watching their sort of 70s or 80s Italian exploitation. I do imagine what they would think if they saw a film even like this, which isn't even really that bad on the whole misogyny front. But yeah. It'd be quite interesting, let's put it that way. Speaking of which, there is a scene, and it happens quite a lot in Italian films, where our main character, Mr. Hubbard, who incidentally is played by Ian McCulloch, who is the main character in Zombie Flesh Eaters, that's another Zombie Flesh Eaters reference coming up there, basically he slaps her and she seems to like it.
Yeah, she says, "Oh yeah, we understand each other now." I think she quite likes it that he doesn't take shit from her, he stands up for himself. So quite interesting, but again, not sure if that would be very PC these days.
No, I don't think it would. No, particularly because, as I said, like, she just doesn't seem that bothered. She's like, "Oh, good. I'm glad you slapped me. Awesome."
She's quite happy about it. That's closely followed by a scene of a carnival when they go to South America, and they've got some quite bizarre scenes. I'm pretty sure it looks like there's a child smoking a cigar, and then there's a man smoking like a gigantic cigar, like bigger than you've ever seen in your life, which once again would probably not be condoned in today's world.
Yeah, you definitely wouldn't be allowed to have children smoking cigars, but I mean, that whole section, like I said at the start of this review, it just reminded me of a shit James Bond film. It's the sort of thing you'd get in, like, I don't know, Moonraker or something like that, because you've got sort of, he is like a Bond villain. We don't even really know why he's planning on bringing all these eggs or whatever the fuck they're supposed to be to Earth anyway. He never really explains what the point of all this is. He's just bringing them to Earth for some reason and then trying to blow everyone up.
Yeah, his original plan seems to be to blow up the whole of New York City by getting it delivered, but he just seems to be brainwashed by the Cyclops, which he brought over as a seed, which is just really weird, and they're very closely connected, and he's just being controlled by this being that he's brought back from Mars, and they don't even know if it's the real him. It's all a little bit vague and quite over the top. Yeah, I mean, it's not my favourite of films. Not terrible, but not brilliant either. Some quite cool blippy computer music going on in this, which does feel very 80s.
Yeah, very, very old looking computers, which again, that's the thing that I always find interesting in films like this, where it's like, yeah, these sort of so old. like just the buttons and just the desks that they're using are just ridiculous. Yeah,
and you got a good old classic romance kissing scene at the end, which was very, very predictable and kind of annoying, but
of course
does feel very Bond-esque again, like you say.
Yeah. The only things, as I mentioned, apart from the music, basically the explosions, which does seem to form up about half the deaths, I would say, is people's chests exploding and their guts just flying out everywhere, which, as a man who likes his gore, I thought was pretty fucking awesome, to be honest.
Yeah, and the practical effects were really cool, actually. It's quite effective.
Yeah, the only thing I would say, though, is the way you would have to do it is almost be like a squib effect, so it just looks like everyone's really fat.
Yeah, I know, yeah.
And yeah, they were just
funny.
really fat, and their stomachs, they ate too much, and like Mr. Creosol, and it's just a waff of thin mint, and then boom, explosion.
Exactly, explosion. We've got, I counted 17 deaths in this film. That includes the Cyclops, so I guess 16 really. But yeah, I mean, most of them do follow that format, which is pretty cool, and you do find yourself looking forward to those explosions as the film goes on. So yeah, really awesome.
Yeah, I mean, the film overall, I mean, I don't hate the film. It was kind of fun. I'd never seen it before. It's not something I'd particularly want to watch again. The bits in the middle where it turned into a Bond film were very, very slow and sort of tedious, particularly the scene I mentioned earlier, because it goes on for 5 minutes.
Jesus.
While we're sort of trying to build this tension of, well, will the guys go into a room or won't they? And they drag it out for so long. It's like, just go in the fucking room. You're going to go in the room. We know you are. She's not going to die. It's just a fucking egg in the corner of the room. It's not going to move. Just go in. Just put us out of our fucking misery, please. So,
Yeah, I know. It's like they both kind of fancy her, but each of them thinks that they're trying to get into her pants, which they probably are.
yeah.
So, but they think the world's ending, so who can blame them, you know?
Well, you got the police in the background at your end, so maybe the world is coming to an end. We just don't know it.
Always is where I live, anyway.
Yes.
One other cool part was when our guy Tony Arras does get eaten by the Cyclops. I quite liked the end part where you see his shoe going last. It was very cool.
Yeah, I thought that was quite cool as well. Yeah, he got swallowed whole, like you say, like a snake.
Yeah, liked it. Yeah, I did think this was a little bit of a silly film. Not one that I would watch on another occasion. One watch is enough for me.
No, me too. Is it a video nasty?
I'm gonna say no.
I'm also going to say no, because really the only thing in it that you might even possibly get offended by is lots of stomachs exploding, which isn't going to bother me, and I can't see why it would bother any other people, apart from if you're really, really squeamish.
Yeah, I mean, I think I felt more bothered about the rat exploding than the humans, to be honest.
Yeah, I get that, but that wasn't a real rat, so...
I know, but
Yeah.
then, you kind of think to yourself, oh, but what if it was?
Yeah, I know what you mean. So this film, if our review hasn't put you off watching it, this film and Inferno, incidentally, because I forgot to mention this earlier, are actually both available from Arrow. So you can buy this film on Blu-ray and indeed on DVD. So if you want to check it out, Arrow's the place to go for all your Dario Argento and indeed your Contamination needs, I would say.
Excellent stuff.
So we move on to our final film for this show, and because I'm gonna just say it, we've only got 7 video nasties left to go before we've watched all 72. Wow. We've been doing this for quite a long time, and the 7 movies that we have left are all zombie movies. So if you like your zombies, like most people seem to do these days, then yeah, this film and indeed the next 2 shows that we're doing are all zombie related. So if you like your Living Dead, check the next 2 shows out. Maybe not necessarily the next film that we're going to talk about though, which is Zombie Creeping Flesh, one of the films with about 1 million alternative titles, is also known as the following: Virus, Hell of the Living Dead, Night of the Zombies, very original title there, Zombie Inferno, and my personal favourite, Zombie 4.
Oh my god. Right, okay. Again, it's a 1980 film, and the synopsis is: a tough female reporter and her cameraman boyfriend team up with a 4-man commando unit in the New Guinea jungle who are fighting flesh-eating zombies. This film is utterly ridiculous. Let's face it. It's cheesy. The music's by Goblin again, very interestingly enough.
Well, yes, now this is one of the interesting things about this film. So the director of this film is very infamous kind of shit Italian director, Mr. Bruno Mattei, who uses his alias Vincent Dawn for this film. And interestingly, this film was written and possibly co-directed by Claudio Fagrasso, who is the director of Troll 2.
Oh my god.
Who also worked with Mattei quite a lot. So, yeah, Bruno Mattei, for those of you who don't know, which will probably be a lot of you, because he's quite a very, very cult director. He's even more cult than someone like Andrea Bianchi, or even someone like, I don't know, Jess Franco, or even someone like that, because his films are basically notoriously shit. This is actually probably his best film, which is saying something, because it's also shit. But I've only seen one other film of his, and it was absolutely incompetent beyond all kind of recognition, to the point it's not even funnily bad, it's just bad.
Which film would that be?
So that was a Giallo, believe it or not. It was called something like Eyes Without a Face. It was something like that. I can't remember what it was called, but it was utterly shit. Incidentally, Matai, he also directed Zombie 3, which is the sequel to, well, unofficial sequel anyway, to Zombie Flesh Eaters, a film called Rats Night of Terror. I can only imagine what that was like.
Oh, I've seen that. It's awesome. It's so bad.
Yeah, I can imagine.
It's so bad, it's amazing.
Yes, and also, interestingly, and I'm not making this up, Terminator 2.
Oh, wow. What?
So, before James Cameron released Terminator 2, Bruno Mattei made a film called Shocking Dark, where one of the alternative titles for it is in fact Terminator 2. And on the box art, they've clearly made the cover art so it's someone who kind of looks like Arnie in Terminator on the front cover. Now, it's actually nothing like Terminator. I've not seen it, but apparently it's actually more like Alien or something like that. But yeah, it's actually quite flagrant in its kind of how much it steals, really. So, yeah.
Jesus. It needs to be a bit
flagrant.
more original. I mean, I liked Rats Night of Terror. I'd recommend it if you like really bad B movies that you should watch that. Zombie Creeping Flesh, I think, is an awesome title, but yeah, this film is a little ridiculous. Not sure if I recommend this at all.
No. Now, you mentioned, well, I agree. I think this film, it's not totally shit. There's aspects of it that I think are absolutely hilarious that we're going into. And yeah, you mentioned the score is by Goblin. It is a score by Goblin, but it's actually the score for Dawn of the Dead that they did, and also one of the songs that they used in Boyo Omega, which I mentioned on a previous show. It's directed by Joe D'Amato. So it's not even original music by Goblin. Like, if you've... Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong, the music is awesome, but it was awesome in Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah, and it does actually feel like he's just reused Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead concepts and, just ripped it off for the whole film. So you can't help but feel that way about it. And again, it brings me back to my point that Bruno needs to be a bit more original.
Yeah, so he's basically ripped off the whole plot of Dawn of the Dead pretty much wholesale. There's even whole sections where you've got characters having these, I think, what's supposed to be very, very political conversations. So I think part of the film is supposed to be set in like Africa or the jungle or something like that, and you've got the president or whoever of the country talking. I think it's supposed to be the UN, about how like, oh, you've let my country down, my country's like overrun by zombies, and it just comes across just really amateurish. It's like you've just ripped this off of like the first 10 minutes of Dawn of the Dead.
Yeah, Operation Sweet Death.
Oh god.
So cheesy. And then, they also have an ill child, a little boy who ends up biting somebody and turning into a zombie, which is just so stereotypical of this kind of film and, done to death, really. Excuse the figurative term there. Pun not intended.
Accidentally on purpose.
Yeah, this film is utterly ridiculous. Again, it feels really long, but it's only an hour and 39 minutes. And I counted around 32 or 34 deaths, I think. That's a guesstimate because it does get a little out of hand. They've also got a lot of zombie extras in this, and they're also painted really badly, kind of grey blue. A lot of them have black faces, and it seems to start off quite well with the calibre of infected people and the prosthetics and the effects, practical effects and the makeup, and it seems to deteriorate as it goes along, and there are more zombies, and they've obviously had to just cut corners to get more of them on set. And then towards the end, they've got this Hope kind of lab place, which is where the whole operation starts, and they've got loads of kind of scientist zombies that have been overrun, and some of them wearing high heels and cowboy boots. It's just a little ridiculous, all the white coats and the grey skin. And you've also got a lot of this wildlife stock footage kind of spliced in between aspects of the film, which just really feels like filler. And some of it is a little dark and a little sinister, which does kind of lend something to the film with its tone, but mostly it's not really that appropriate and feels a little strange.
Yeah, it just... I can't... Well, fuck, I mean... Yeah, there is a lot of stock footage in the film, like Rhea says, to the point where it almost becomes like self-parody, because there's just that much of it. Like, every couple of minutes there's just a random shot of animals in the jungle, even animals that you wouldn't even think would be in the jungle. Like, there's a whole like footage that they cut in of elephants. And I'm like, where in the jungle would there be fucking elephants?
Yeah, and there's one where it's like hundreds of bats in the daytime. Just like, what the fuck? And like, the funniest scene is that when that reporter, she says she's been studying tribes, and she just takes off all of her clothes, and there's like close up of her boobs, and then she puts some like tribal paint on and like a sort of a grass skirt or whatever, and like barely any clothes, and she just runs off like semi-naked into the jungle to join the tribes, to be like the person to communicate. And all these tribal men just surround her, and I honestly thought for a second that she's going to be like attacked or something, because she's literally like probably the only sort of white-skinned person there. She stands out like a sore thumb, because she does look like a sort of modern Western woman, but just with this tribal paint on. And she's like just kind of walking in there almost fully naked. It's really crazy and really hilarious how they put that together.
It's just, yeah, absolutely ridiculous how in front of this group of soldiers, she's just like, yeah, I'm just going to take all my clothes off and, yeah, just paint up, go into like this tribe's kind of area. Bear in mind, like, we don't know who this tribe are. They could be cannibals for all we know. I'm surprised they weren't cannibals, to be honest, because that was very popular around this time as well. So
there is one scene where one of the, I think it's a breastfeeding mother, and she's eating what look like maggots.
Yeah.
Which I guess is where some of the controversy comes from for this film. I'm not sure what else is there that's really controversial. I mean, there's quite a lot of shooting going on. There's quite a lot of like zombie biting. That's probably the most controversial bit that he's filming, which does feel a little bit sort of found footage-esque, again, like Cannibal Holocaust sort of film in the New Guinea jungle. It does have that feel to it, but not excessively, just a little bit.
Yeah, because what this film, from reviews that I've read and seen of it, a lot of those reviews do mention that, like, oh, in these sections it's got kind of a Mondo feel, because you've got the use of the found footage, and it's more, look at the weird natives, look what they're doing, look, this woman's eating maggots, look at these people, they're dancing funny, and stuff like that, which you would tend to get in a Mondo. But to me, it's just, Matai, I just don't think he knows what the fuck he's doing. So, at the start of the film, you've got these people in a power station, which was absolutely hilarious. It's my favourite bit of the whole film, just for some of the dialogue that you get in these scenes alone. I will give you some more choice dialogue, which is as follows. May not know much about chemistry, but in bed, her reactions are terrific. I'm not surprised with a cute little ass like that. Ha, I'm a tit man myself.
Oh god, yeah, I noted that bit down, and then was just absolutely laughing hysterically at Operation Sweet Death later on. So there's also another bit where he says, "Don't get your balls wasted." Keep saying that about balls and stuff. Also calls women quite a few times dumb broads. And there's like one really sort of cliche, stereotypical code bit where they go, "Eagle calling base." And it's just like, could it be any more obvious? Who wrote this shit?
Well, the director of Troll 2 wrote it. That's why it's so shit, probably. I don't know.
There you go. And he says, it's hot as a horse's ass here.
Yeah, it's just so bizarre. So yeah, it goes from the power station, and then all of a sudden there's a siege, where they're taking terrorists for some reason. It's like, what the fuck's going on? So I talked about Inferno earlier, how you've got this dreamlike feel, and the plot doesn't make any sense, but you can kind of appreciate it for, dreamlike quality. And when we talk about the Beyond, when we do Lucio Fulci, like, it's got a similar feel to that, where it's very nightmarish. This is just incompetent. It's like, we got a power station, then we got a siege, then we got a bunch of people in the jungle for some reason. Who the fuck are these people? Where the fuck have they come from? Then it becomes a cannibal film. Then it becomes a Mondo film. Then it becomes like sort of a zombie film again. And then it kind of rips off kind of, Dawn of the Dead a lot. So it's like you've got about 5 different films in one. It's just, yeah, no wonder it felt so long, because there's just way, way too much happening.
I know, yeah, it is all just a mishmash and doesn't really make any sense. I didn't really like the terrorist bit. It's really over the top. The acting's so over the top. Another controversial bit that may have pushed this film over the edge in terms of being banned was, again, a bit kind of cannibal holocausty, but like when she's looking at the tribal people in the jungle, they're gutting an animal. You can't really tell what kind of animal it is. The hide looks kind of stripy. But they've got the intestines out and they're kind of pulling them out everywhere and like putting their hands inside them and stuff. It's just really strange.
Yeah, although the only thing I would say about that is you don't actually see the animal die. So the animal could have died for natural causes for all we know.
Yeah, but it's definitely real insides and it is gruesome. And then there's another part where it's quite obviously fake, but there's like a dead child or a dead person and there's like a topless mother that's rubbing some oils from him onto her body, which is quite weird. And then there's like another decaying body that's taken off into the jungle and put up on like a plinth. So yeah, that's kind of, I guess those are the scenes that got it banned because they probably thought it was a little too close to that kind of cannibalistic sort of film that we've had before, like very similar to that in that aspect of it.
Yeah. Maybe. I wouldn't have banned this film personally. That's just me. But I can kind of see, like, maybe. But the film's just so inept, though. It's not horrible. There are bits of it that are kind of perversely entertaining. I would say that the character of Santoro, who's the crazy guy who's overacting like an absolute motherfucker, he kind of made it sort of almost worthwhile just by his sort of overacting with the zombies and stuff like that.
He's the badass of the film.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, the score's great. It was great when it was in the films that it was supposed to be in, but the score's quite good. And it's kind of unintentionally hilarious in a lot of places as well. Like, you've got all these characters, when they're getting attacked by zombies, they don't run away. They just stand there looking scared, waiting for the zombies to get as close to them as possible.
Even though the zombies are, like, incredibly slow. And, like, by the way, these are probably the funniest zombies that I've ever seen. They're, like, so stiff and, like, just, hilarious, really.
Yeah, and think of the ground that covers, by the way.
Oh, yeah. I've watched a lot of zombie films with very bad zombies in.
Yes, you have, indeed. Yeah, so...
At one point, they sort of comment that there's a whole family of zombies, which I just found really funny. It's like this family in a house sort of walk out all together. It's just like, what's your point? Is it meant to be cute? I don't think it is.
Yeah. You've got a cliche of a zombie film where there's only one character that actually has any common sense, which is actually Santoro, who sort of says, you've got to shoot him in the head. Everyone else is stupid and shoots them all in the body, and obviously they don't die, and it's only a Santoro guy who actually goes, look, you got to shoot him in the fucking head.
Yeah, wasting bullets, god damn it. There's also, at one point, they sort of go to this empty house, and it's like, it's kind of got a bit of a much less developed feel of 28 days later in it. 24?
Slightly fewer days, yeah. Let's call it 24 days. Yeah, let's hurry up, yeah?
28. Just taking a shortcut, It's like a very much less developed version of 28 Days Later, because it's just that feel of the house where they go into it and there's nothing there and they're not really sure what's going to happen, and then this family of zombies comes out and zombies come out all around and they're kind of discovering them as they go around, and there's like an old woman that's a zombie and you're not really sure. You think she's like dead or asleep at first. So it did have that kind of feel to it, which was quite a cool aspect, but it's so kind of dragged out with all the other stuff that's going on in this film and so kind of confusing that, like you've said, it just really doesn't know what it wants to be or where it wants to go. So it does become ridiculous, confusing and tedious.
Yeah, although that old woman did have a cat randomly inside her guts.
Oh, that was pretty cool, actually. I did like that part of it because it does look quite real, and I think it's like a kitten. So they did really put it into this device or prosthetic, and it has to get out. So it is quite convincing. There's one ridiculous scene where there's like loads of zombies at the window, and the camera's like got that sort of point of view where you've got the hands coming towards it. They do a lot of that in this film, which again just feels very drawn out and protracted and very slow and unrealistic, because yeah, it's cool to see them in front of the camera and to feel like you're the person that they're coming towards, but it's just not done in a very effective way. It's done in a really false way, so you end up having too much screen time for that because they just want to use it, and then it just kind of gives this whole fake feel to it because you see the zombies a little too close up and you see how fake they look, so it kind of ruins it.
Yeah, there's a lot of that in films like this, I've got to be honest, which kind of kills the illusion. Zombie makeup, bar one or two examples that I can think of, particularly the films of Lucio Fulci, yeah, him again. Zombie makeup not the best in films like this. Even in Burial Ground, the Andrea Bianchi film, which is, came out about a similar time to this. Yeah, the zombie makeup in that wasn't really very convincing either.
Yeah, I know. Got one really funny line written down here when they're talking to the zombies. Again, the dub is like, it's okay, it's not ridiculous, but some of the sentences used are just a little laughable because it just either tries too hard or it comes across as like weird and a bit stiff. So at one point, the line is delivered to the zombies: "You friggin' ball breakers, do as you're told." Because they've been very naughty boys, those zombies.
Definitely.
And our hero, the rebel, he says, "I'm one baby that they're not biting."
Oh, Jesus. The only other highlight I would say is there is a particularly violent death where a character gets their tongue ripped out and their eyeballs pushed out by a zombie hand, which goes right into her skull, which I thought was pretty cool, I gotta say.
Yeah, that's our final girl, Leah. I thought that was really cool because somehow the prosthetic of her face, they got the eyelashes and the eyes to look quite realistic, and like the tongue really wasn't, but it was cool the angle of the camera when she was screaming because the zombies are coming towards her. Her mouth was quite wide, and then it just shows the tongue being ripped out whilst she's screaming. And the transition from her real face to this prosthetic one where they pushed the eyeballs out was really quite good, even though it was just so close. I think that was probably the coolest scene in the whole film for me.
Yeah, I would say so too, which is quite funny because it actually happens about 2 minutes from the end.
Yeah, it's a good climax, but again, it's just a little confusing and did feel very long, even though it's actually not that long a film.
Yeah, pacing not really all that great in a film like this. So as I said, I mean, like Contamination, oddly enough, it's not completely without merit. It's shit, but it's kind of watchably shit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like it's quite light because you really don't need to pay that much attention because it's changing pace so rapidly anyway, and it doesn't make sense that you don't really get that invested in it. But in terms of the visuals, I mean, even though I do feel like these days zombie movies are totally overdone and we've just seen so many, there is something about watching a zombie movie, especially an 80s one, that's quite enjoyable, and just seeing some of the effort they make with cheap effects and things. It is laughable, but it is also watchable, like you say. Not one to watch numerous times, but quite fun. Quite a fun watch.
Yeah, I completely agree with your sentiments. Yeah, you'd think, like, with technology being what it is now, where people can seemingly make movies for like hundreds, of pounds almost, that you would get sort of people with like a little ingenuity. But no, people are actually even lazier than something like this. So most zombie movies now, for the most part, are just shit. They're actually worse than this. This at least has some kind of character and there's some kind of fun to it, I think, even though it is shit. Whereas a lot of like these sort of straight to VOD movies now are just boring. It's boring as fuck.
Yeah, I agree. It's just become so generic and uniform and just like it's been churned out on a conveyor belt and so similar. I mean, we don't really need to watch the same things be created again and again. And at least I do feel like they put more effort in back then. And there has been effort made with this, even if it's an amalgamation of way too many ideas put together, which I feel like he's done because he's just picked on aspects of films that may be popular and he couldn't decide on one and just wanted to give it more chance of being popular, so he's just mashed it all together. But it's not done itself any favours in doing that. It needs to be more of a well-written film, not just a compilation of anything that they feel might sell. It's unfortunate that they've done it that way.
Yeah, definitely. So, if you want to see a film that's a zombie movie crossed with sort of a war movie, crossed with a sort of Mondo movie, crossed with a sort of cannibal movie, with a score ripped off from Goblin, then
with terrorists.
With terrorists in it as well, who are dispatched pretty quickly, I have to say. They're pretty shit terrorists.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's as good as Troll 2 in terms of hilariously bad, laughable, and enjoyable.
No way.
It has got a flavour of that, let's just say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Troll 2 wouldn't have been a video nasty, not by any stretch of the imagination, and neither, I would say, is this film.
Yeah, I mean, despite the maggot eating and the intestines and such like, I'm going to say no.
Well, there you go. So 3 non-video nasties on the show today. Really, the BBFC maybe a little bit too sensitive in those days. I think they would be offended by anything. Maybe they would have survived a lot better these days. Let's put it that way. The amount of sensitive people in the world.
I guess the tongue being ripped out and the eyes coming out is what really sold it, but it's hard to say. I think maybe back then we would have said yes, but now it just like doesn't affect me whatsoever, so I'm going to say no. So,
if you would like to buy this one on DVD, you can in fact do so from 88 Films. You talked about earlier sort of you wouldn't want to watch this film over and over and over again. If you did want to watch this film over and over and over again, don't recommend that, by the way, then that's kind of how you would do it. So 88 Films, those guys again, them and Arrow are kind of the two kind of key sort of places to go for your video nasty needs, particularly the Italian films.
So we've got zombie films coming up, which is pretty damn cool. I am looking forward to that. So 6 more left to go. That's not very many, with our episodes coming out every fortnight on a Sunday, and you can catch the complete back catalogue as well on iTunes, YouTube, and so on and so forth. So we don't have very many more left to go. Can't believe it.
Yeah, I know. There's only 2 Video Nasties episodes to go, as I mentioned earlier, all zombie-related films. So, really looking forward to those. Ria's stolen my plugs, but I will persevere nonetheless. So you can find us, if you have not done so already, on Facebook under the Lament Configuration podcast, on our dedicated YouTube channel, also under that name, on Twitter at Lament Horror. You can find a podcast also on Stitcher, on Podbean, and on TuneIn Radio.
Yes, and I, as always, have been Ria Fend. That's F-E-N-D. You can find my Facebook page, my public modelling and actress page, under Ria Fend, and I am sailing past 66,000 likes and followers at the moment, so thank you so much to everybody who's joined me on there. I'm also on Instagram and Twitter as Ria_Fend. And Greg, I'm very excited that I'll be taking up some more acting work soon. A little bit of bit parts and background work, but I'll be on TV and hopefully in some films soon. So exciting times ahead for me. I'm very happy about that.
Yes, definitely. And like I mentioned earlier, very interesting. We've got 2 films that are scored by Goblin, but I'm going to leave you today with a song that's taken from Inferno, which is actually from Keith Emerson. So I really, really love this song. I hope you guys love it too, and we'll catch you on the next show for some zombies. Blah.
See you on the flip side.